Good evening, everybody. I'm Betsy Fischer Martin, the Executive Director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University, and welcome to our virtual series, Women on Wednesdays. Whether you're watching on Crowdcast or Facebook, we're glad that you could join us this evening. And to those of you new to one of our events, WPI is a nonprofit and nonpartisan institute in AU School Public Affairs, and we aim to close the gender gap in political leadership, and we offer academic courses and practical campaign training and facilitate research and discussions like this on women in politics. So since we started our Women on Wednesdays series last spring, we have had almost 50 female guests, but tonight we are welcoming our very first male guest, but he is here to discuss our very first female Vice President, Kamala Harris, who of course was sworn into office 35 days ago. And before she was vice president, of course, she held several other elected positions coming up through politics in California. And our guest, Dan Morain, was there covering and writing about state politics for many, many years with the LA Times, and then as the editorial page editor of Sacramento Bee. And he has written a new book on our new vice president, appropriately titled Kamala's Way, which gives us an insider's view on her rise through California state politics, all the way to, of course, holding the second most powerful elected office in the country. And we are looking forward to our conversation this evening. I want to let everybody know that we are going to save some time for questions. So please do post a question in the Ask the Question queue at the bottom. And you can also upvote other folks' questions down there that you're interested as well in. And if you'd like to re-watch this program or share it with friends, you can do so at this exact same link that you registered. So welcome, Dan, and congrats on the book.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So set the stage for us a little bit and give us a sense of how you came to write the book and what you hope ultimately that readers will take away from it.
Well, so I retired. Back last
Congratulations.
And was doing a little bit of freelance, and was invited to do a piece about Kamala Harris in anticipation that Joe Biden might, we didn't know, select her as his vice president. And the editor there, Michael Duffy, great guy, said, Morain, you really ought to write a book about Kamala Harris. And I thanked him. I was flattered, but I didn't. And then a couple of weeks later, he sent me an email saying, you really should. And so I talked it over with my wife, and we decided to go for it. He called a friend of his at Simon & Schuster, and we were off to the races. And we did race.
So I wanted to start a little bit chronologically with you, because that's how you've kind of structured the book of starting out with her childhood and then going through her career, all the way through to the actual election. So give us a sense of Kamala Harris as a young child. I think most of us know, just the basics of her story, but what can you tell us about, what California was like when she was growing up, the relationship that she has with her mother? Of course, we hear a lot about that, and her sister as well. And give us, you said she has said that she's had a stroller's eye view of people getting into what John Lewis called good trouble. And so she was, I guess, keenly aware of sort of civil rights and her parents being involved in that as activists in the state as well. So give us a sense of her childhood.
Yeah. So her mother is this extraordinary woman. I never met her. She died in 2009. But imagine, a girl, really 19 years old, has already graduated from college in India, and her passion is to become a scientist, and she couldn't do that in India. So she imposed on her father to allow her to come to Berkeley. And so a 19-year-old young woman goes halfway around the world to a place she's never been, UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. 1959, we were a very different world in 1959, certainly a very different state. She met her husband there, Donald Harris, and in 1961 they got married. Kamala Harris was born in 1964, and 1964 is really an interesting year in California and in the nation. That's the year Lyndon Johnson is elected president, and for all his failings around Vietnam, he certainly did usher in landmark civil rights legislation. It's also the year that California voters passed an initiative that basically affirmed housing segregation. Mm-hmm. So this is where she's born. And Berkeley at the time becomes hugely significant to the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement. Kamala Harris, her mom, clearly is a force. Without a doubt, she is the most influential person in Kamala Harris's life and in her sister Maya Harris's life. They both talk about her in reverential terms, and it's really quite touching. Much less so their father. The parents divorced. The divorce was final in 1972. Although he was a force. He was a professor of economics at Stanford, no small feat, and had he could visit on weekends or have them on weekends and during the summer. But from what she has said, and this is an unauthorized biography, so there are questions that I would have asked had I had the opportunity. I didn't. She has said that he is a good guy, but they're just not that close. So.
And then she comes to Washington for college, to Howard University. And do you think that sort of introduced her more to the political world, or what was her? What did she get involved in when she was in Washington?
Well, just one step back, Shamala Gopalan, her mom, got evidently passed over for a job at Berkeley, and rather than sit around and brood, she got a job at McGill, no small feat, and she brought her daughters to Canada, French-speaking Montreal. So Kamala was there from age 12 to about 18, and then goes to, and that's a pretty formative time in a kid's life and a person's life. And then she goes to Howard. Howard was an intentional decision on her part. I mean, she had to, I'm sure she could have gone to virtually any university. She's a very bright student, and did a lot of extracurricular sorts of things. So I'm sure she could have gotten into some fancy university and that wasn't historically black college. She chose Howard. Her mom had made clear to both her and her sister that she understood that they were going to be viewed in America as black, and made sure that they were well grounded in the whole civil rights movement and the history of it. And then at Howard, she was engaged in marching against apartheid and other activities. She was an intern for Senator Alan Cranston, in whose seat she would later serve. So she was clearly engaged in politics, and that was shaping her.
And then she goes back to California, and she goes to law school, where in the book you said people that knew her there say she was not a standout.
Well, that's clearly true. She did not graduate with honor. She went to the University of California Hastings School of Law, which is a very good school in the Tenderloin neighborhood of San Francisco. Not a fancy part of town, and not the fanciest of law schools, but a really good law school. And no, she did not graduate with honors. She was there, by the way, at the same time Christopher Stevens was. You may remember him as tragically the diplomat who died in Bengal.
Oh, right.
Yeah, one of her classmates.
And then she goes and she becomes essentially a courtroom prosecutor as the deputy district attorney for Alameda County.
Yeah, and So Alameda County, across the bay from San Francisco. She's working in Oakland, and then sort of the satellite offices of the district attorney's office in Alameda County. This is a storied office. Earl Warren was the district attorney in Alameda County. Ed Meese came from the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. Lowell Jensen, influential Justice Department official during the Reagan administration. So it produced some pretty amazing figures in American history, and I'm sure that was an allure. I have no doubt that she has spent a lot of time studying Earl Warren. She quotes Earl Warren, so I think he mattered to her in her life. But yeah, Alameda is, it's a tough part of the state. She was prosecuting crimes in Oakland when the murder rate was really high. It was a tough town.
And then she runs for essentially her first political office then as district attorney for the San Francisco district.
Yeah. So San Francisco, she stayed in Alameda till 1998, and then she, one of her bosses from Alameda County got hired as chief deputy at the San Francisco DA's office, and he brought her with her, and she had a position, a supervisorial position there. She had disagreement with the district attorney, Terrence Hallinan, and then in 2002 she decided to take him on. Now that was a big deal because there was no one could have predicted that Kamala Harris would have won that race. She started out with name recognition of about 6%. Nobody knew who she was. She had been written about some in Herb Cain and in the San Francisco Chronicle, sort of the for lack of a better term, sort of the gossip pages. As she had become sort of a bold-faced person. She was involved with the Museum of Modern Art. She was, she knew a lot of people in San Francisco, but voters didn't know her. Anyway, in 2002, she decides to take on Hallinan, who had a huge name. He was the son of a Hallinan who ran for president as a progressive. So he was really well known. Everybody in San Francisco knew Terrence Hallinan was KO because he was so pugilistic. And she won. So it was pretty extraordinary.
And you write in the book that she was a good politician and she knows how to fit into most situations.
When you see Kamala Harris give a speech, I mean, she's a very good speaker. She will hold a room. But then, when she gets off the dais and if she comes over and talks to you, you're the only person in the room. That sort of person, the politician, it's direct eye contact. Yeah. She's asking you something about yourself or whatever. She is a very good retail politician. So yeah, she certainly has charisma, without a doubt. She would come to the editorial board of the Sacramento Bee and was really well versed on the issues. Would answer in thoughtful questions, thoughtful answers. She wouldn't answer questions too. She was very good at answering questions and very good at not answering questions. Very good politician.
And, this is a photo that we're showing here of her, of course, with now Governor Gavin Newsom, but who at the time was the mayor of San Francisco. Right. And she, you have an interesting quote, and it certainly as it pertains to women in politics. I guess shortly after she was elected as DA, she was speaking to the campaign training group Emerge, and she talked about running as a woman. And I just want to read this quote that you have in the book there from her. It says, there's absolutely a double standard you need to be aware of. Being a woman that some would consider attractive carries its own baggage. People assume you're not substantial, and it's why it's so important to talk to as many people as possible and keep conveying what you stand for. How was she treated during those early days in the campaign, running as a woman?
Well, running as a woman for Attorney General, and that's really the first race of hers that I paid attention to. She was formidable, without a doubt, and she was running against some really accomplished men. Ted Lieu being one, now a member of Congress, she stood out. She was the only woman, but more than that, she had moves. I mean, she was really a really good politician. She staked out positions that others did not. She made clear this was 2010 when she was running for AG. At the time, the issue of Proposition 8, that was the ballot measure from 2008 that prohibited same-sex marriage, and so there was a big court fight going on over same-sex marriage, and specifically over Proposition 8. And so one of the issues was would the Attorney General defend that initiative in court? It had passed, not by a small margin, in 2008, or would she? Would the next Attorney General not defend it? She made clear she would not defend it. Her Republican opponent, District Attorney Steve Cooley of Los Angeles, said he would defend it. So that differentiated her. She also made clear, as she did during her DA's race, that she opposed the death penalty. Cooley was very much for the death penalty. LA had put many, many people on death row. San Francisco hadn't put anybody on death row since, I'm trying to think, maybe the early 1980s. It had been a long time. So she differentiated herself. She was clearly, significantly to the left of Cooley. But then back to the primary, she was different. I mean, she made clear when she was running for district attorney that who she is mattered. She went to the public library in San Francisco and got copies of the photos of every DA who had preceded her. And of course, they were all white men. Mm-hmm. And she put that on a brochure, and she, of course, is not. And the same was true with California Attorney General. They had all been white guys, and she was not. So, she was a very, from appearances, but also substantively, she was very different than
and she clearly had sort of a good political antenna. I mean, you write about sort of her early on, having a friendship with Barack Obama, who she hosted a fundraiser for him as a state senator. I guess it was in 2004 when he was running for the Senate.
U.S. Senate, yeah.
Early on with Barack Obama. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she sure was, and it carried through. It carried through the presidential election. I was part of the team at the LA Times that helped cover the 2008 presidential campaign, and she was with Obama from the very beginning. She went out to Springfield in 2007 when he made his announcement. That was a gutsy move. California in 2007 and 8 was very much Clinton territory, Hillary Clinton. Almost all significant politicians, electeds, endorsed Hillary Clinton. Democrats had endorsed Hillary Clinton, not Barack Obama. She was, I believe, the first, if not the first, one of the very early ones, and that was a gutsy move. So she was there in 7 and 8 for him. He was there in 2010 when she was running for Attorney General. you know, it was apparent to anybody who paid attention to Kamala Harris that whatever her office was, DA or AG or U.S. Senate, that wasn't going to be her final stop. But it really didn't matter what reporters like me thought. The Republicans thought this. In 2010, Republican super PAC, its chair was Ed Gillespie. You folks in Virginia may remember him. Spent more than $1 million on a really tough ad that went directly at Kamala Harris over the death penalty, and she weathered that, but in part she weathered that because Barack Obama came out after that and held a fundraiser for her south of San Francisco in Atherton, and then held a rally for her down in LA.
And that's not so much because they cared whether she was going to be elected attorney general, but they did that because they wanted to sort of stop her ascension into higher office.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a through line from that to what's going on now in Washington. I mean, she's clearly a target of Republicans, understanding that vice president's not her last stop.
Right. Also, you write about sort of her first, entree onto kind of the national stage ended up being somewhat ironic because she was given the honor of giving a convention speech in 2012 for Obama's reelection. She had written a very powerful speech, but at the end of the day, that was not the speech that she ended up giving. What happened?
Well, exactly what happened is the people running the convention for Barack Obama's reelection said, "Yeah, nice speech. Let's give you this one." And so it was just it was your classic talking points sort of speech, and her staffers who were there realized as soon as she started giving it, I mean, you've been on a convention floor. I've been on a convention floor. Some speeches you really pay a lot of attention to, and some you just ignore, and you sort of talk through it. And people were talking through this. So this particular speech, and so this was going to be, it wasn't going to be like Barack Obama in 2004. As a senator giving that riveting speech he gave, but it could have been. It was a good speech. The draft that I saw anyway, I could well imagine her giving a rip-roaring speech. It got spiked, and in exchange was a sort of boring, typical talking points. And I would have ignored it.
And so kind of following along on the chronology, I mean, the next sort of big thing to happen to her was she ended up meeting her husband now our second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and they got married in 2014. And you write about their relationship and how supportive he is of her along the way. A little bit about that.
Yeah. So I've met him a couple times. He's, he strikes me as a really charming guy. I know a fair number of people, lawyers in LA who know him, who have worked with him and alongside him. And I spoke to some of them. And he really is a decent sort. He's down in LA, Century City. He's a divorced dad, tries to maintain contact with his kids, does maintain contact with his kids, golfs, is a Lakers fan, and one of his in business, and one of his clients is Rex Hudlin, the film producer, and he and his wife come to Doug Emhoff for advice, and at the end of their consultation, Rex Hudlin's wife asks, "So, are you single?" And he asks why, and she says, "Well, I've got this friend who, is single, and maybe you'd like her. And what's her name? Kamala Harris." And this is a very LA answer. He said, "How do I know that name?" So this is a big time lawyer. He's a managing partner of a big firm down in LA, Venable, I think it is. And he doesn't know the name of the AG. She jogs his memory, and he says, "Oh yeah, now I know who you're talking about." Anyway, so one thing leads to another, and they get married in 2014. I think he, just from what I read and see on Twitter and elsewhere, I mean, this is a guy who's really, really loving being second gentleman. He was wise to leave his law firm, DLA Piper,
right,
because it has a big lobby arm in Washington, and I don't know how he could have possibly navigated the conflicts there. So anyway, so he's going to teach, and I think his students will be well served by Professor Imhoff.
Yeah. So she wins her reelection as Attorney General, and then a few days after the election, the announcement that Barbara Boxer announces that she is not going to run for her own reelection in 2016, and then Kamala gets in that race. Yeah.
Well, the Attorney General, the initials are AG, and of course everybody knows that's aspiring governor.
Right.
So everybody assumed that Kamala Harris was going to run for governor when Jerry Brown's term came to an end. But then, her buddy Gavin Newsom also wanted to be governor, and the Senate seat opened up, and Barbara Boxer, who had served since 1992, announced her retirement, and it's kind of interesting the way it was explained to me is her campaign people, politics had become nationalized. I mean, I know this as a State House reporter for 30 years in Sacramento. Used to be, I think, governors were far more important than they are today, and that's partly because of the reduction in news coverage of state houses, less so in Sacramento, but certainly in other states. Sacramento still has a pretty aggressive press corps. So it was explained to her, it was laid out this way. Do you want to be Elizabeth Warren, or do you want to be Deval Patrick? Now, Deval Patrick is a really talented guy, really smart person, but
Governor of Massachusetts.
Really not well known outside the Northeast. Elizabeth Warren is known nationally, and so for somebody with big ambition, which being a U.S. senator in this time when politics are so nationalized, sure, she chose to run for the Senate, which worked out well because Gavin Newsom wanted to be governor, and so here we have it.
Well, and you just mentioned the other A word, ambition, right? Which gets tagged a lot, and certainly came up as strangely enough, a ding against her in the vice presidential search process of ringing everybody out in the press, labeled as ambition, which, in my opinion, ambition and politics are one and the same. You can't be in politics if you aren't ambitious. Yeah, but, she's sort of had to deal with that following her around all the time, right?
Well, of course. Yeah. And I mean, it's of course it's a double standard. I mean, I've never, there's not a politician I know who's not ambitious, and that it was somehow a ding against her was clearly a double standard and unfair. But yeah, sure, she's ambitious. So is Joe Biden. So is Donald Trump. So is Mike Pence. I mean, they all are. You don't become district attorney, attorney general, U.S. senator without having some ambition. And you probably, as a voter, I probably want people who are aspiring, who think they can move up, because they'll probably do a better job at it.
And her staff, you write about this also in the book of, her coming to Washington then, when she won the Senate seat, we're really strategically planning for, again, what's next after the Senate, and really put a lot of thought into what committees is she going to be on? You know, what are those kind of high profile committees where she can shine? And she wanted to be on judiciary. She wasn't picked in that first year, but is obviously was on it later. But what was that process like, sort of behind the scenes, as she kind of came to Washington with, again, you know, thinking about that national profile?
Well, so you know, nobody can do these things alone. I had the help of a great journalist in Washington, Josh Meyer, who we worked together at the LA Times. So anyway, he helped me understand a little bit about the Washington, the world that you operate in DC. And so Dianne Feinstein, Kamala Harris and Dianne Feinstein have had an up and down, uneven relationship. But when Kamala Harris was elected to the U.S. Senate, Dianne Feinstein really helped her out and encouraged her to get on the Intelligence Committee. Ron Wyden became a good friend of hers and similarly encouraged her to get on intelligence. Now, you know, that's not a committee you choose if you want to be on Rachel Maddow every night, because it just so much of what they do is done in secrecy, appropriately so, and it's a lot of work. So, you know, but she did. It was I think it was important. It helped her understand better the world in which she now operates, without a doubt. But yeah, she clearly wanted to be on Judish, and when she got there, she certainly made her presence felt. You know, with questioning Jeff Sessions and William Barr and
Kavanaugh later, yeah.
Don't forget Brett Kavanaugh.
Exactly. So we're going to go to some questions in just a minute here, but I wanted just to round out the chronology of, you know, her decision to run for president, and then, you know, what actually happened in that campaign, how it sort of imploded, and you know, what you learned. And interestingly enough, you're talking about Dianne Feinstein. Dianne Feinstein didn't support her for president.
No, she was a Biden person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, she entered the campaign understanding that it was a long shot. I mean, everybody who ran for president and who ran for president in 2019 understood that it was going to be a long shot. You know, Bernie Sanders was at a top tier candidate. Elizabeth Warren was, and Joe Biden always was. He was
right.
The front runner from day one. So, you know, she understood that she maybe had a 10% chance of getting the nomination. So, you know, I think she had realistic expectations. When she decided to run, she ran to win. She was not running for second place, which is why your folks will recall her going after Biden in that first debate,
right.
talking about his position on on busing for school desegregation. She understood that in order to win, she had to break through in South Carolina. That was a source of support for Joe Biden. So she went for it. It didn't work. You know, maybe it worked for a minute, but it ultimately didn't work. And her campaign just, you know, it was an odd campaign. You know, part of it was based in Baltimore. Part of it was based in the San Francisco Bay Area. There was internal conflict. There was a great story in the New York Times by one Jonathan Martin that sort of laid it out. And so she dropped out. She never, you know, coming from California, you ought to be able to raise a ton of money. Well, she, in her first quarter, raised $12 million. That's, you know, a lot of money in my world, in your world, but not in a presidential candidate's world. And think back to 2007, Barack Obama's first quarter, he raised 27 million. So, you know, so it just didn't take off. Now, lots of candidates, lots of presidents, including the current one, run multiple times before they win. So, I'm sure she learned a lot from this one experience. I doubt it will be her final experience running for president.
Right. And, certainly, you mentioned the debate. A lot of people had thought, well, maybe that, when the vice presidential process came front and center, maybe that was going to kind of sink her chances. There was some damage control that I think she needed to do. And you talked about certainly Jill Biden, actually, being very taken aback by what happened.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, you write about essentially like a campaign that started, with the lieutenant governor and trying to convince the Biden folks that she should be the one selected.
Right. So this was interesting. I'm not sure it got the sort of national attention maybe that it should have, but yeah, it was there was talk about, Stacey Abrams as vice president. So remember, Joe Biden announced that he was going to choose a woman, and then George Floyd died under the knee of a cop.
Right.
And so he was going to pick a woman, and after George Floyd's death, I think it became obvious that he was going to pick a woman of color. So one could have been Stacey Abrams. Susan Rice clearly was in the mix. Congresswoman Karen Bass from Los Angeles was without a doubt in the mix. And Kamala Harris. And there was buzz. I mean, I remember reading this that she was losing support, that she, was not very well liked in California. Well, she has, her share of detractors out here. But Eleni Kounalakis, who was California's lieutenant governor, remember her name, is a supporter of Kamala Harris. She was Barack Obama's ambassador to Hungary. She organized a phone call, and she got a bunch of prominent Democrats on the phone. Long Beach Mayor Stockton's then Mayor Michael Tubbs, former Governor Gray Davis, and they all gave a spiel that she organized this call to Wilmington, and they all gave 60 or 90 or 120-second spiels about why Kamala Harris was the person that Joe Biden ought to pick. And I think that was an important inflection point. I think it made clear that Kamala Harris had a deep well of support, and she does in California without a doubt. She probably wouldn't have won the primary in California in 2020, but that doesn't mean she's without support here. And you could see it. I mean, she infused the ticket with energy. Certainly, fundraising took a spiked upward when then Vice President Biden chose Harris as his running mate.
And how do you think now, as Vice President, given what you know about her policy priorities, what do you expect her to be focusing on over the next year or so as Vice President?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that Biden and Harris are focused on COVID, which is where they need to focus, right, and getting the economy back running. The issue, one short run below, I think, is immigration. Mm-hmm. When she ran for U.S. Senate, she made clear that one of her top priorities was to work on the immigration, our broken immigration system, and that clearly matters to California. I mean, 2.5 million people living here without papers. That matters. I mean, they're integral to California's future and its economy, and so immigration is going to be a big issue. And then she's the deciding vote in this 50-50 Senate. It's happened once. It'll happen more than once in the months ahead, I'm sure. So I think, though, that she's really smart, strategic thinker, And she understands that her success depends on Joe Biden's success. And so she's going to be the best vice president she can possibly be to Joe Biden. And so it's whatever, I think she follows his lead. She will follow his lead.
I want to go to some questions, and please feel free, folks, to jump into the question queue and post a question or upvote some of the other questions in there. But Isabel has a question about media portrayal of women candidates kind of being fraught with gender generalizations and stereotypes. And so I want to ask you about that, and also to talk about, you and I were talking earlier about your former colleague, Noah Bierman at the LA Times, just wrote a piece the other day talking about, the, horrible kind of attacks online that, has been directed toward Kamala Harris, probably as the most targeted American politician on the internet, misogynistic, sexist, violent, horrible things online. And so I guess maybe just talk about, both from, the online component, and then also when we think about media and how she's been treated as a female politician.
Mm-hmm. Well, that she was criticized for being ambitious is, clearly a double standard. She's tough. She can be really tough.
Yeah.
She can be tough on staff. She can be certainly tough on witnesses before the U.S. Senate, as Brett Kavanaugh could attest, or Jeff Sessions. So yeah, she's tough, and so I've seen Lindsey Graham be pretty tough on witnesses, and lots of other senators. But she, of course, yeah, she's going to take her more than her share. I mean, I see it. When I go on Twitter and I see a good story by Noah or some other reporter, I'll tweet it, and invariably I'll get retweet, or I'll get notes from people who have 20 followers or whatever, saying just saying the most vile things about her. And
right. Sort of the bots that work. Yeah.
I mean, it happened when she was in the U.S. Senate. I wrote a column about it when I was at the Bee, the Sacramento Bee, and so it's something that I'm sure one never gets used to. But I also know it's not the first time that she's endured it. I'm sure it's at a whole different level now. I mean, our politics are just are so coarse.
Let's see. We also have two questions about Harris's performance during the primaries. What else she could have done to win the nomination, and then also, whether, if she runs again, if there is an opportunity for her to run in 2024 or 2028, how she will run differently. Obviously, she'll have the platform of having served as vice president. But what are your thoughts on, I guess, what ultimately happened in the primary and why she couldn't pull it off? And then what does her political future look like?
Well, she couldn't shake the support Joe Biden had. I think Democratic voters concluded that he was the one who could beat Donald Trump. Now, I should say that when she was deciding whether to run for president, that there was a meeting, a confab at her sister's house in Manhattan, sister's apartment in Manhattan, and all her key staff were there, political staff, some of her policy staff were there. She knew that it was not gonna be easy. She was she understood that it was not at all a sure thing, but she would only run if she was persuaded that she could beat Donald Trump. So she wasn't running for the nomination. She was running because she thought she could beat Donald Trump. And she wouldn't have run. People have told me that she would not have run if she thought that if she thought that she would lose to Trump. I found that pretty interesting. her bio as a prosecutor, very different from Barack Obama. He's this constitutional law teacher at University of Chicago and worked at a boutique law firm in downtown Chicago. Kamala Harris was a courtroom prosecutor. Anybody who's covered courts knows that they see a really tough part of life. Mm-hmm. In the primary, that didn't help her because the left viewed her as Kamala, not Kamala Harris. And but I think in a general election, it wouldn't hurt to be a former prosecutor. I mean, I don't think anybody really likes crime, and to the extent that she could draw on that piece of her resume, I think it would have been helpful.
And what about a future presidential race from her? What do you think that would look like?
Well, it will be a very different race. I mean, she will enter it as a presumed front runner, as a former vice president, and I know that the conventional wisdom in DC is that President Biden is a one-term president. I mean, I don't know. He's wanted to be president for a long time, and I think if his health permits that he runs for re-election. I don't see why he wouldn't. So if it's 2024 or 2028 or 2032, right? She will be formidable. People underestimate Kamala Harris at their peril. I mean, she's very good. Back when she was running for California Attorney General, her opponent Steve Cooley told me a story about how his chief consultant said, Steve, this is really not a race for Attorney General, it's a race for Vice President. People, Republicans were thinking then that Kamala Harris was ascendant. And that's why they tried so hard to stop her then. It's why they're trying now to, sully her as Vice President.
Here's another question.
Do the same to Republicans. So.
Isabel is asking, are there any elected women in state or local politics today that you see as following in the footsteps of Vice President Harris, or is her career path and professional identity difficult for women to imitate?
Well, no. I mean, of course, it's tough to imitate. But no, there are some really serious women in California. I mean, California's got a huge, really deep bench of talented Democratic politicians, fewer on the Republican side. Val Demings, I mean, she seems to be
in Florida.
Pretty impressive. Certainly Stacey Abrams. These are people who are going to be around for a long time. And again, I do think that there are folks such as our Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kounalakis, our California Treasurer, Fiona Ma, our California Controller, Betty Yee. I mean, these are three women who any one of them could become governor after Gavin Newsom, and may well. I mean, my bet is it's going to be one of those three.
I wanted to also ask you, because you mentioned the meeting at Maya's house, and that the role of her sister in her sort of political inner circle. I guess there was some criticism during the primary campaign that, there was some conflicts with staff-wise and consultant-wise, but what is her role, and what has her role been in sort of Kamala's inner political circle?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I don't know Maya. I know a lot of people who know Maya Harris. I know that she is formidable, incredibly smart, and fiercely loyal to her sister. And Kamala Harris is incredibly loyal to Maya. They have a small family. I mean, it's Maya and Kamala Harris and Mina Harris, Maya's daughter, Kamala's niece, and Maya's husband, Tony West, and Doug Emhoff. So it's a small nuclear family, but it's intensely loyal from everything I gather, and from what I was told, Maya would be the first person Kamala would call in the morning and the last person she would talk to at night, and staffers knew not to get between them. So I mean, yeah, they're they're good friends, they're trusted confidants.
And what about sort of the role that now her stepchildren now are kind of front and center too, right? I think her stepdaughter has now got a modeling contract, so I guess all eyes are on sort of the family.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what a California story this is, right? So Doug Emhoff and his ex-wife evidently are very good friends.
Yeah.
And Doug Emhoff's ex-wife is bonded with our vice president, and Doug Emhoff's children are called Kamala Harris Mamala, as she says on her Twitter feed, or has said in multiple contexts. So yeah, it's a thoroughly modern California family. So.
And what was sort of, as you were reporting on this book, what was the kind of the most surprising thing that you found that you think folks should know about? Mm-hmm.
Well, so I knew Kamala Harris as a really smart, deft politician. Not always smart, deft, strategic thinker. Mm-hmm. What I didn't know, but I came to learn, and I thought this was really quite sweet, actually. She became, she's got this real empathetic side to her. So and it goes back to her days in high school, where a good friend of hers in high school had serious trouble at home. And the Harris family in Montreal took this girl in. They remain friends to this day. This friend from Montreal and the vice president. Mm-hmm. One of the more touching stories that I heard involved Tyrone Gale. He was her press secretary when she first got to the Senate. He had worked for the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign and had colon cancer. He thought he had beaten it, and went to work for Kamala Harris as press secretary. It recurred. He married the love of his life and her life, Beth Gale, and tried to beat cancer. This is 2018, so it's right before the midterms. Kamala Harris is in great demand to stump for candidates around the country. Here's that Tyrone is near the end, and hops on a shuttle from DC up to New York to hold his hand for 20 minutes or so, and tells Beth that she'll always be there for her. And I believe that that's the case. And then fast forward October 2020, Kamala Harris is running for vice president. She's kind of busy. But on the date of Tyrone's passing, she took the time to call Beth. We all know if anniversaries are the toughest times, sure. If you lose somebody. And just letting Beth know that on this particular day, she wasn't alone. I mean, I think that matters. And there are similar stories that I ran across throughout the book. And I was touched. I thought, okay, this is a side of Kamala Harris that we don't know, but it's also, and I don't even know if Joe Biden knew this when he selected her, but it seems to me it's a trait they share. And in these horrible pandemic times, I think we all need somebody in office who is empathetic.
And so you mentioned you had tried to get an interview with her.
Multiple times,
for the book. And so I guess just as a journalist, if they called up tomorrow and said, okay, for the paperback version, you get an interview. I mean, what are the areas of her life that you would most like to explore with her?
Well, it's all the personal stuff.
Yeah.
So she was she marched against apartheid at Howard University in 1990. So at Howard University in like 1986, I think it was. So in 1990, she's a young deputy district attorney. Nelson Mandela came to Oakland, to the Oakland Coliseum, and gave this huge, spoke at a huge rally. I was there. I covered it for the LA Times. I want to know whether she was there, whether she saw this and what she thought of it. In 1991, she's a young lawyer, and the Clarence Thomas hearings are going on, and Anita Hill testified, and Joe Biden was the chair of the Judiciary Committee. I want to know what she thought about Anita Hill and Joe Biden's performance and Thomas and all like that. And I want to know, what happened with her father. I mean, she calls him a good guy, but that they're not close. As a father, that's. I mean, I would break my heart.
Yeah, and I didn't see him at the inauguration either.
Nor did I. I mean, there weren't that many people there, but I think if he had been on the stage,
we would have.
I would have recognized him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this terrific book. It's a great read, and everybody can, if you're interested in ordering, there's a link on your screen to do that. And I want to let folks know about two more upcoming events on Women on Wednesdays that we have. Next week for International Women's Day, we are going to talk to Gail Zemak-Lamont and about her new book, The Daughters of Kobani. So please check that out as well. And then toward the end of March, we're going to talk to two reporters, Jonathan Allen from NBC and Amy Parnes from The Hill, who have just written a new book called Lucky about the Joe Biden campaign. And so we're going to explore some issues about women voters during 2020. So we hope that you will join us for that as well. And so thank you so much, Dan, for the book and for sharing this with us tonight. And we want to thank everybody for watching as well, and hope everybody has a great week.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Take care. Bye-bye.